Welcome to this event in the 2020 Portobello Book Festival. My name is May Shaw and I'm a member of the organising group. The festival is organised annually by a local group of enthusiastic readers and writers in conjunction with and in support of the local public library. Books featured can be found at the Portobello Bookshop. I would like to thank today's contributors for their willingness to participate in this reconfigured festival. Thank you for joining us and we hope you enjoy it.
Hello and welcome to this event for the 2020 Portobello Book Festival. My name is Louise Kelly and I'm one of the organising committee of the Portobello Book Festival. And this event I'm really pleased to be talking to an author who grew up in Portobello and then after exploring many other parts of the world has returned to base herself here again. Janis Mackay, welcome.
Thank you.
Janis is an award-winning author, winning the Kelpies Prize and the Scottish Children's Book Award for her children's novels. She's a renowned storyteller and respected teacher of creative writing. I've known Janis for quite a few years now as a friend and a writing buddy, so it's lovely to get the chance to talk to you about your writing and storytelling and share some of these things with the Portobello Book Festival audience. So thanks very much for agreeing to take part.
Thank you.
So one thing I've always loved about your writing is your ability to conjure up a physical space, visual details and atmosphere of place. So that's kind of what I'd like to begin with today. And by way of starting that, I wouldn't mind, would you mind telling us a little bit about how you did that, conjuring up a sense of place in your latest novel, The Watchmaker's Wife? And you might even start by introducing that book in general.
Okay, right. So this is The Watchmaker's Wife, and this is a photograph of my grandmother. And actually, the journey with this book began with this photograph. So that is my grandmother. I don't know if you can see it very well there. Probably taken, a good 100 years ago. So yeah, I'm intrigued where novels begin. And certainly this one began with a photograph. And I then started to imagine, how the photograph came to be taken, and then I began to kind of uncover my grandmother's colourful life. Or maybe it was my grandfather who had the colourful life and my grandmother who suffered because of his colourful life. So actually in terms of a sense of place, although it's set in Leith and it's set in Craigmillar, mostly it is set in the past.
Yeah.
So that kind of sense of place is very much imagination. A lot of it is set way before I ever knew her. She was in service before even the First World War.
Yeah.
So I did a lot of kind of research about being a servant, watch things like the Forsyte Saga and Downton Abbey, and I've got an old recipe book, for instance, Mrs. Beeton from 1935. So I kind of immerse myself in, and also try to imagine what it would be like to be her, because actually I write this in first person point of view.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Did you ever have a conversation with her or with any of your relatives who knew the details of her work?
Relatives definitely, but not with her. No. So in many ways this is a real journey of the imagination. And I mean, I did have a lot of conversations with my Auntie Helen, my Uncle John, my Uncle Bill, all before they died. And then many conversations with my mother. And it was also a very good kind of family thing to do, because it was the kind of story, certainly grandfather, the bigamist, the alcoholic, the communist, the fiddle player, kind of a bit romantic, also shame. So to just kind of tease out these stories. And I suppose now they all happened a long time ago. So maybe some stories are easier to tell when there's 70 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because you've based this on real family events. Did you feel that? Did you get the same story from everybody about what was going on, or did you find contradictions in people's memories?
Yeah, a good question. More or less the same story. Yeah, I mean, obviously a lot of it is my imagination, but I have used a few core scenes of things involving my grandmother and the grandfather, and I've woven the story around these apparently true stories. Yeah.
Yeah, so you took something that was a kernel of family folklore,
yes,
and then you created a kind of a narrative, a novel structure there. So I was wondering about how you went about that task actually, because people's lives are necessarily kind of messy, and they don't follow a nice narrative arc when you're taking creative writing. When you're trying to teach your creative writing, you will be telling people how to create an interesting arc out of the story. So how did you go about?
Yes, very laboriously. To begin with, I wrote in third person point of view, and I started with my grandmother's birth in 1895, and I chronologically went through leaving school at 14, working in a shoe shop, not liking that, going into service, then there for 10 years, war breaking out, getting married, dum. And I did the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
Gave that to my agent, who said a very similar thing to you, that a life, even although it's a very interesting and colourful life, doesn't necessarily make a novel.
Mm-hmm.
Unless, I suppose, somebody is very, very famous. But yeah, so I rewrote it. I wove in a love story. I then wrote it in first person point of view. Yeah, I worked a lot on this book to kind of get it into some kind of shape that maybe resembles a novel, taking really elements of a life and trying to give it a shape that stands up as a novel.
You mentioned the love story element in there. Was that something you fictionalised completely, or did that have a basis?
I fictionalised it, but I did take it from, and I think authors do this, writers do this, that there was a bit of a story here and a bit of a story there that I kind of borrowed and wove in. And when my cousin read the book, he thought that the love story was true. And of course it could have been, because, part of the love story is the tragedy of 70,000 young Scottish soldiers losing their lives between 1914 and 1918, which is the years, where my grandmother would be courting.
Yeah.
So I made it up, but it could be true.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. I think that was such a common defining factor for a lot of people's lives in that era. Right, so could we return to thinking about the photograph for a moment? Is that something that you knew as a child? Has it been on the house?
No. It appeared maybe about 12 years ago. My mother gave us these photographs as a kind of Christmas present.
Mm-hmm.
And so as I say, that was the beginning of my journey. And in fact, the first thing I did, which I don't have with me, is that I wrote a poem.
Oh, lovely.
Based on that photograph, which then turned into this novel. And I could read a little bit, if that's okay. So this is from the middle of the novel, and the way the novel works is it takes place in present time, as in Joanna is married. She is the watchmaker's wife, but it's not exactly a bed of roses, and so she lives quite a lot in her memories. That's my way of feeding in all this research that I did on childhood at the beginning of the 20th century, and being in service. So yeah, this is a little scene where she is in service in Trinity and has her half day off, and she's going up to Princes Street to have a photograph taken. So this is how I've imagined it. Okay, so I'll just read a little bit. I had a photograph done once. Did you, Mother? Aye, when I was young. Where is it now, Mother? I have seen the photographer's studio on Hanover Street uptown. Once a month we are given a Saturday half-day holiday, so this Saturday I've booked myself a sitting at the studio. I have saved for 3 months. Now here I am, groomed and feeling excited, like a bairn going to Portobello Beach. I try to slip out the house without Mrs. Wakeford seeing me, but no such luck. Have a nice afternoon off, Blackie. You are looking very smart. Going somewhere special? No, not really, ma'am. Not really, but nonetheless a bit special. Is that it, Blackie? You can tell your mistress, I hope. Grace is clipping Mrs. Wakeford's fingernails, and she glances briefly up at me. I can tell by the way her eyebrows lift that she is impressed. Yes, ma'am, I say, blushing. Well? Well, it's the photographer's, ma'am. I don't have one, a photograph that is, and I thought I could have one, ma'am. Well, Joanna, she says, you must wear a hat. Not seemly for unmarried girls to show off their heads. And sit demure, Blackie. These photographs last for a long time, you know. Yes, ma'am. I mean, Joanna, you could be dead, and your children will look at this photograph years from now, and how will they feel if their own dead mother is hatless? Yes, ma'am, probably quite unhappy, ma'am, quite. And Blackie, be back by tea time. Mr. Wakeford would appreciate his Sunday collar starched. But, right, yes, ma'am. A photograph only takes an hour. I know, Blackie. I have had several done. Oh, and Blackie. Yes, ma'am. Don't smile. Smiling cheapens the photograph. You don't want to live to regret an awful glaikit smile. I won't, ma'am. Then I am off, hair washed, blouse and skirt flat ironed, and wearing the brown felt hat Mrs. Wakeford recommended. I have to hurry now, and I have to walk the 3 miles into town. Every farthing is needed for the photograph. After an age, I arrive at the studio. I compose myself, breathe deeply, open the door, and step inside. Miss Blackie? I nod, heart thudding, knees trembling. With my handkerchief, I gently dab at the perspiration on my forehead. Lovely to see you. Good day to you. A very good day indeed. Now, come away into the forest. The man in a black frock coat says, smiling, so his heavy handlebar moustache lifts all the way to his round red cheeks. I am on a woodland bench in a woodland setting. I hold my face at an angle. To the left, my chin slightly pointing down, but my eyes towards the box camera. He has the box balanced on a tripod and surrounded by reams of black cloth like a mourning dress. I have been sitting like this for ages, and my shoulders are sore. He has told me 3 times that if I move even half an inch, the photograph will spoil. We want you preserved untarnished. he says, "A work of beauty is alive forever." He speaks like the poets. He has given me a sheet of paper to hold leisurely in my lap. "Imagine Europe is at peace," he says, like a minister in the church. Then he winks at me, and imagine, Miss Blackie, you are holding a love letter in your hand.
That's fantastic. I really noticed that passage when I was reading.
Did you?
And I think partly because I just thought it really captured that that sense that women, particularly young women at that time, had such little control over their own lives. And the fact that this young woman in service has her mistress lording it over her the whole time. And then the rest of the story is the story of her in a marriage where she has very little control, and she has to wrestle control the whole time.
That's true.
Were you aware of trying to explore that kind of idea in the book?
I suppose unconsciously, actually, that the freedom is in the mind, which of course can make one a bit mad as well. If you start to live so much in your memories and in your imagination, it means that of course, she's got 5 children, so
that grounds you a little bit.
That grounds you, yeah, and all the cleaning. So it's like there's some freedom which is in the mind. You can't imprison that.
No, that really comes across. I mean, I wondered what other kind of themes and ideas you were sort of consciously exploring as well as being this tale of your family. It had expanded to be much more universal than that, I thought.
Yeah. Well, growing up, my grandfather, to me, was kind of whispered, but for me, romantically. A bit like a hero, communist, played the violin. And then the lower whispers, the alcoholic, in fact, he's got another wife. Yeah, but you can still, so maybe you asked about themes, maybe there's something about romance, that I am kind of busting the romance of my grandfather.
Yeah.
But in its place, I have the romance of James Melville.
Yeah.
This, her, that keeps a kind of sanity. She keeps a candle.
Do you want to explain a little bit about who James Melville is?
Yes, James Melville is her love. But in fact, she met him, he was rowing the boats down the river. And in those days, Victoria Day, 24th of May, that was a big day. And they had a holiday, and she meets this handsome man. And, it's a very brief meeting, yet deep. And then he's off to war. She never sees him again, but she kind of keeps him alive in her imagination.
Yeah, I think you capture that really well, and that whole sort of change in landscape of of life at that time when when all these people were lost, and it was an enforced change in how how people lived.
Yeah,
I think it was a real change. One of the other things that you wrote really well in the book, and you mentioned that there was this, the Joanna's husband is a fiddle player, and he gets his fiddle out at the drop of a hat or a drop of whiskey.
Yes.
And I also noticed there's a lot of mention of street songs, children's street songs. So I wondered if you wanted to say a little bit about the music in the book, and why you chose to sort of focus on that.
Yeah. Gosh, as you're asking me, I'm realising, it makes me kind of realise maybe what kind of writer I am. A lot of it is rather unconscious. you know, I'm not much of a planner. I kind of write and see what happens. And yeah, I mean, you know, going to things like the Museum of Childhood, they have this beautiful black and white film of street songs of Edinburgh. And yeah, and you know, and I like singing, I like music. I have actually recently recorded this book, so it's now an audiobook. So it's quite fresh in my mind. You know, I sang quite a few of these
did you? Great.
songs. Yeah.
And is there any? Do you play the fiddle in the?
Jika does.
Jika Lole,
so Jika, who lives in Portobello, has played the fiddle. Yeah. So one of the songs, which is a bit of a theme, and originally I was going to call this book Bonnie Dearie. So one of the tunes is Call the Yows. Call the yows to the nows, call them where the heather grows, call them where the burnie rose, my bonnie dearie. And this apparently was a song that my drunk grandfather, coming in at midnight, would demand to hear and get one of the young laddies out of his bed to sing to him. So yeah, and of course, you know, my grandmother in many ways does play the role of the Bonnie Dearie.
Yeah, I know. You mentioned the children there, sort of, like, you know, being witnessing these, you know, their father being drunk, and you know the impact that had on their mother and on them. So I think it's not surprising that that all became a very strong kind of family story.
Yeah.
When you see the impact of those things. I wonder if we could move on to talk maybe a little bit about other aspects of your writing.
Yes.
But just to say that if you haven't already read The Watchmaker's Wife, it's a really great tale, but it's really thought provoking as well. I think it's a really good read. So another aspect of your life is that you do teach creative writing.
Yes, I do.
And I wondered if you wanted to say a little bit about how that feeds into your creativity, or the impact it has on your writing life.
So I'm really interested in craft. Yeah, and I like teaching. I used to be a speech and drama teacher, so I kind of really enjoy the perhaps the word is facilitation rather than teaching, but I enjoy working with people in that kindling creativity. And certainly in the creative writing, I teach at Edinburgh University and I teach privately. I run various courses. Yeah, so just kind of going deeper and deeper into, and there's so many, as you know, elements of craft. You know, not just the obvious things like point of view and dialogue and setting, but you know, close up, middle distance, far distance, you know, time shifting, slowing it down, speeding it up. Yeah, there's a lot to learn. So yeah, and I hope that all this teaching that I'm doing, some of it might rub off on me.
Yeah, I know they do say, don't they, that the best way to learn anything is to teach it. So I think that comes across in your writing. You've obviously spent a lot of time learning your craft.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
The other side of your writing that possibly people might be even more familiar with is your writing for younger readers. And I mentioned in the introduction there that you won the Scottish Children's Book Award for the
Accidental Time Traveller.
And then the Kelpies Prize for your Magnus Finn Selkie books.
Yeah.
Now they, the Selkie books particularly have a very kind of specific sense of place in them.
Yes.
I think.
Yeah, they do. Where is it? Here it is.
Yes, do you want to hold that to show?
Here we go.
So
Yes.
there's a series of those two.
Yes, there's a trilogy.
Trilogy, right.
Yeah, so this was the first book that I got published, and I was living in the far north of Scotland. I just finished a master's in creative writing and then got a job as a writer in residence, and that took me to the far north of Scotland. In fact, this book of poetry was the first thing I did as a writer in residence, and that got me very inspired in writing in response to the environment, in response to a place, and so I was, writing poems and very happy doing so. But I also did want to write novels, and I didn't quite know what to write about. And I remember a day I lived in a cottage by the sea in Dunbeath in Caithness, and I looked out to the sea and I could see something sticking up through the water, and I didn't know what it was, and then I asked a fisherman, what is that thing sticking up? And he said that is the remains of HMS Gretafield, a sunken battleship.
Wow.
Yeah, that's exactly the word. I thought, wow, right in front of my house there is this sunken battleship. And that was my kind of eureka moment. And then I thought I could write a novel about a boy who could go under the sea and explore all these sunken ships, because there are, in the Pentland Firth, which is at the very top of Scotland, there are hundreds of sunken ships. And originally he was going to be a merman, because I was thinking mermaids, and then I thought actually Selkie. And also where I lived there was a lot of seals, and there was also unfortunately a lot of rubbish washed up on the tide. So I kind of put those things together and created this character called Magnus Finn, who's half human, half Selkie. He can breathe under the water, and he becomes a kind of eco-warrior, cleaning up the sea and having adventures. So yeah, that's dear old Magnus Finn. And that's, you asked about sense of place, that was very much, I just had to go walking along the beach and come back and write a bit more. You know, up there it's very remote, lots of cliffs, lots of nesting seabirds, lots of caves, and very few people. So kind of quite easy to, my imagination could work quite easily, really. Shall
Do you
I
have a
read
piece
it?
of, yes,
Shall
lovely,
I?
yeah.
So I could read just the beginning of Magnus Finn, which I should know off by heart. Shouldn't even have to put my specs on. Okay, chapter 1. Hello, whoever you are. My name is Magnus Finn. I'm glad you picked me out of the sea. In 3 weeks, I am 11. I've got a Neptune's cave in my room with bottles and bits of boats and shells and funny shaped wood and treasure off sunken ships. I live beside the sea. If anybody finds this, I want to have a best friend, and I want to be more brave. I want my parents to be happy like they used to be. I hope 11 is good. Maybe we will meet. Whoever finds this, we can be best friends. I have different eyes. One is green and one is blue, but I am fine. And like I say, my name is Magnus Finn. Good luck. Magnus Finn rolled up the small sheet of paper and fed it carefully down through the bottleneck, then corked the dark green glass bottle. It was 10 o'clock at night, but this far north in Scotland, come midsummer, it hardly ever got dark. He ran down to the shore, then leapt easily over the craggy rocks. When he was as far out as he could go, he swung his arm once, twice, 3 times, then flung the old green glass bottle out to sea. The water was smooth. The bottle hit the surface with a plop, vanished for a moment, then floated back up where the outgoing tide carried it away. Magnus Finn watched until his bottle was a tiny speck bobbing in the distance. "Good luck!" he shouted after it, then turned and jumped from rock to rock until he was back on the sand. Once more he turned and peered out to sea. His bottle had gone. With excitement pounding in his chest, he ran back home along the shore. "Where were you, Magnus?" his mother called from her darkened bedroom. Her voice sounded thin and wispy. Magnus Finn gently closed the front door of their small cottage and stood in the half-light of the living room. "I was just down at the sea," he said, still panting from his run. "It's still light." "Aye, and it's late, laddie. What else are they going to say about us? With you running about like an urchin? Come through here. Let me see you for a second." His mother's words sounded dry and anxious, coming from her darkened room. Magnus Finn, biting his nails, breathed deeply, then took his ragged nail out of his mouth and stepped into his parents' bedroom to say good night. "It's still light, Mum. The sun is still up," he said, peering through the dim light to where he could just make out the hunched figure of his mother sitting up in bed. Red rays from the setting sun stole through a slit in the closed curtains and fell upon his mother's ancient-looking face. Though he had looked upon his mother like this for some years now, and often in darkened rooms, it still shocked him to see how withered and lined she had become. "I threw a message in a bottle out to sea," he said. "That's all." "Oh, did you, son? What for?" "For fun, and I made a wish." "Good, Magnus. That's good. We could do with wishes. Were there any waves to speak of?" his mother asked, her words slow and shaky. "No, the sea is still flat as a pancake," he said, edging backwards. He wanted to be gone from this dark, sad place. He wanted to be in his own room, which he had made into a treasure trove full of the findings he had combed from the beach. And he didn't want to tell his mother about his wishes. If he told her, they might not come true. Everybody knew that.
Great. So in there we get that sense of, not just a sense of place, but we can see the kind of, children's worries about the family dynamics, etc. But there's also some hints that there are things, not of this world
That's
in
right.
there.
Things in this.
Yeah. So, and you mentioned that the Selkies are involved in these books. So, just before we kind of wrap up, I wondered whether you'd want to tell us a little bit about the use of myth in your work and your interest in that.
Yes. Yeah, well, it's become a very big interest. This is called The Selkie Girl, and this I was asked to write this book by Floris, and they're aware that a lot of myths, folk tales, fairy tales are in fact not really for little children, and it's true. A lot of the Selkie stories are more adult based. So I took that very beautiful Selkie story and I rewrote it, making it suitable for 4 to 7 years old. And yes, certainly the myth of the Selkie is something I've used a lot. Here's another story, Wild Song, which is in fact set in Finland, but that also has kind of mythical, mysterious seals in it. So yeah, certainly the Selkie story, and because I am a storyteller, so I know quite a few traditional stories that come from the oral tradition, and of course it's a tried and tested way of writing new stories is to borrow from old stories. So I suppose, certainly with Magnus Finn, I partly borrowed from the old stories, in this case, Selkie story, and for those who don't know, a Selkie is a magical seal that can, believe it or not, this is called the willing suspension of disbelief, they can take off their seal skins, and underneath they are girls, boys, men, women, and they run around and play. So it's that shape-shifting, and the tragedy often is that, in some of the stories anyway, the Selkie who is running around playing and full of innocence and kind of naivety maybe forgets where they left their seal skin, and maybe a lonely fisherman might come along and steal it. So often the story goes that there's a bit of bargaining happening. The fisherman says, "Will you marry me? And if you do, I'll give you your seal skin back after 7 winters." So I have borrowed a lot from the Selkie story, and as you probably know, I'm doing a PhD at the moment, looking at bringing these strands together of life story and myth. So to what extent might we be able to mythologize our lives, or give our own lives a bit more meaning when we can make connections to certain myths? And certainly Jung, for instance, has done that a lot, mostly with Greek myths. So I was interested in what does it mean to live in Scotland, and what about the myths that are very much part of a Celtic landscape, and how could we who live here connect more to these myths, like the Selkie or like the Cailleach. She is the kind of earth mother of a Celtic landscape.
Yeah, that sounds like it's going to be a fascinating piece of research too. And given the fact that you're doing all that, you are still writing your fiction and books, and what's coming out next from you, Janis?
Yeah, so a book like this what's it called? This is called Traditional Scottish Tales, and so I have a new book coming out. I think it's spring 2021, and I think it's called The Fairy Song. It's going to be really lovely. The artist, Ruxi Masani, is a beautiful artist. So that's going to be a fairy story.
Great. And is that with Floris?
It's with Floris, yeah.
Great. So that's great. So, well, thank you very much, Janis. I've really enjoyed our chat. I hope the audience find it as enjoyable as I have. And if you're interested in getting hold of any of Janis's books, there's a link on the Portobello Book Festival site to the Portobello Bookshop, which will be able to supply you with the books. There's also a link on there to Janis's own website, if you're interested in finding out anything more about her writing, teaching and storytelling work. So just once again, I'd just like to thank you very much, Janis.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.